And it's interesting that what I started to do was look at what survives of ancient texts describing the ancient world, describing the gods, and then looking at how contactees and abductees today, or what have you, are describing the people that abducted them. And because I've spoken in, 16 countries since February last year, I've been able to meet people in all these different countries who are telling me the same story. I spent 5 hours with a Zulu shaman in this February in South Africa called Credo Mutwa. And he was describing to me the extraterrestrial experiences of the Africans, and he was describing the same things that are being described by people in America. Incidentally, Zulu, the word Zulu actually means people from the stars. They think they're a royal race because they say they came from the stars. And so I started having a look at this stuff. And I started to realize that there is evidence in the ancient world which has really not made the mainstream, not surprisingly, which is absolutely devastating to the conventional version of history. I've heard that the Dead Sea Scrolls are being suppressed and all that stuff because they don't want us to know what's in them and it's a scandal, and I agree with all that. But what has been suppressed more than anything else in terms of mainstream knowledge is what was found in 1850 in what is now called Iraq. At a place called Nineveh, which is now near the Iraqi city of Mosul, something like 25,000 clay tablets were found, which were buried thousands of years BC by the Sumerians, or from accounts that led back to Sumeria anyway. And these completely rewrite conventional history and make sense of what appears not nonsense at the moment. First of all, they talk about the fact that an extraterrestrial group, which they call the Anunnaki, which translates in Sumerian as those who from heaven to earth came down thousands, hundreds of thousands of years BC, and interbred, indeed created what we call Homo sapiens. And they describe how it was done in what we would call, originally, test tube babies. Now in 1850, what a joke! In 1950, what a joke! What they described, humans are now doing. These texts, thousands of years BC they were buried, describe the solar system and depict the planets in it that we have only confirmed in this century. They describe what Neptune and Uranus look like in ways that have only been confirmed in literally the last few years. And when the probes went out that eventually showed what Neptune and Uranus looked like, the experts were expecting something very different. What did they find? What the Sumerians said thousands of years BC. You look at the Dogon tribe in Africa, apparently a primitive tribe in Mali. When white people first started questioning them about their beliefs and knowledge, these Dogon tribe, which still exist today, they said that there was a star, the dog star, Sirius, and that it had a satellite moon going round it that took about 50 years to complete an orbit. And they said this moon is very, very heavy, the heaviest star in the sky. At that time, no one had any evidence that there was a satellite going around Sirius. As we got more sophisticated with the technology, they have established that indeed there is a satellite goes around Sirius. We now call it Sirius B. It takes about 50 years to do an orbit, and because it's what I think they call a collapsed dwarf star, it is amazingly heavy. So they go to the Dogon. How do you know that? Because the people from the stars told us, and it's been passed on ever since. All over the world you find the same stuff, in Central America, South America, Africa, everywhere. And a number of things also start to come into focus, interestingly. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed, tall people. come up again and again. When you look at the Sumerian text, it talks about the fact that they interbred with their human creations, creating hybrids. This is where we get into the bloodlines that run the world today, I would suggest, as we go along. In the Book of Enoch, which is another ancient text, not connected to the Sumerians as far as we know, they talk and describe the birth of strange babies, which they call the babies of the gods, the children of the gods, the children of the angels. And how do they describe these children as they grow up? Tall, blonde, with something very different about the eyes, which is exactly what this guy's told me in the last few months down in America, who works for the CIA. And then you look at Genesis. What does Genesis say for people who are into the Bible, which they have every right to be? Genesis says that the sons of God came down and interbred with the daughters of men. Now, it's an interesting thing when you get into it. Every single time the Old Testament says the word God, it is translated from a word that means God's. Elohim, Adonai, and all the rest. And what that phrase, sons of God came down to interbreed with the daughters of men, actually says in the original from which it was translated, it says sons of the gods interbred with the daughters of men. And the Old Testament can be shown now, that certainly Genesis and Exodus I'm talking about, to have been written from the same Sumerian accounts. What happened was in, I think it was 596 BC, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin and the Levite priestly class, the scribes, were taken into captivity in Babylon. Babylon was a civilization that followed Sumer in the same area, so therefore had access to the Sumer accounts of what went on. This is where, in Babylon, the Levites wrote Genesis and Exodus. So in the Sumerian texts, you find the story of King Sargon the Elder, who was found in the bulrushes by a royal princess, which became Moses being found in the bulrushes in Exodus. Which is why in the Sumerian text it talks about the place of the gods, the Garden of Edenu, which became in the Old Testament the Garden of Eden. And it talks in the Sumerian text also about how, like I say, they created humanity as we know it. And what's interesting, in the same period that they're talking about comes the scientific mystery called the missing link. When a physical form known as Homo erectus, which still shows itself in Bill Clinton today, Homo erectus walked this planet for about 1.5 million years with apparently no demonstrable change in its genetic evolution and its physical form. Suddenly, around 300,000 years ago, there was a leap to a new physical form. Very quickly, far, dramatically more quickly than natural evolution would take place. There was an intervention. So conventional science and the Sumerian texts are constantly interacting with themselves. So this is one of the, just to give you a feel of it, this is one of the cylinder seals, which is some of the pictorial parts of these tablets that were found. They've been translated by a guy called Zecharia Sitchin. Zecharia Sitchin's written 5 books in a series called the Earth Chronicles, just translating what these texts say. Zecharia Sitchin is not a UFO buff. He's not looking in the sky for lights. He is a scholar and an expert in Middle Eastern and Near Eastern languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, etc. And as a result of that, he's merely translated what these things say and come to the same conclusions I'm talking about tonight. They're excellent books that I strongly recommend if you're really interested in the great detail of this. So we're looking at, again, that's another thing from the text, which could well be a rocket. And indeed, you know, when you translate what they called some of the names, they called them the Lords of the Rockets, the land of the Lords of the Blazing Rockets. And that's what I found in Chichen Itza recently, in the Maya country. And unless that's, you know, it could well be a rocket. And again, the Maya also talked about this. The Native Americans, I just spoke at a Native American conference down in Santa Fe called the Star Peoples Gathering. And that was all about their belief, going back into their ancestors, about the star people who came from the sky and interbred with the women of the Native Americans. All over the world you find the same thing. Not only that, you find the gods again and again described as tall white beings, like Quetzalcoatl, the god of Central America, was described as a white god. All over the world you find this. Now, there are definitely other extraterrestrial races involved here. I mean, someone described it, a lady called Linda Moulton Howe, who's done a lot of research into the cattle mutilations that have gone on around the world. She said investigating this stuff is like researching in a hall of mirrors while standing on a quicksand floor. And it really is, because of the disinformation that's trying to divert you from whatever the truth is in there. But there are other races involved, what we call the Greys, like the ones that were found in the Roswell incident, etc. But there's certainly this blonde-haired, blue-eyed thing keeps coming up again and again. And let's take it more into the modern world. The Nazis, is Lethbridge here? You'd enjoy this bit. You'd enjoy this bit, because the Nazis, when you look at their true history, were created by a network of malevolent secret societies, Thule Society, Edelweiss Society, Brill Society, and other even more malevolent ones that were much more elite. And therefore they had access to this underground flow of knowledge that perhaps is not the true history of humankind, but is certainly a truer one than the one the public are told. And what did they get obsessed with? A blonde-haired, blue-eyed master race. And I think that that master race is actually of extraterrestrial origin originally in the ancient world. And here's, again, some of the Mesopotamian, that's for anyone who's not into it, the same area as Sumer. This is some of their depictions of their gods. Excuse me. I mean, there's one, I haven't got it here, it's ever so funny. I've got an illustration, I must put it on slide. It's of something that was found on a drawing on a wall, an ancient drawing. And when the archaeologists looked at it, they thought, well, crikey, I know what it looks like, but we can't have that. So they said it was a moth. Well, it's the only moth with twin engines I've ever seen. Now, what I talked about the fact that all this is very relevant to what's going on today, by the way. We go on a little journey here. It all fits together. Well, I think it does anyway. Credo Mutwa, when I talked to him, this Zulu shaman, I talked to him for 5 hours. Eventually, he talked about this global elite and all that stuff, and he knows what's going on. We talked about that for ages. And then he got onto the extraterrestrial stuff and how he'd been abducted in Zimbabwe many years ago, and what happened to him. The Greys seemed to be the description, definitely were, of what he described. But then I said to him, just as a matter of throwaway line, I said, do you think that there's any extraterrestrial involvement with this global elite? Oh, of course, he said. Same as the other guy. I said, well, which ones do you think are involved? He said, the Sikaza, which translates in his language as the deceitful ones. And you know when you ask someone a question and you know what they're going to say? I said, what do the Sikaza look like? He said, they're blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and very tall. I thought I've heard that before. And he drew this because he's a bit of an artist, Credo. He's a wonderful man. And he drew this because he was telling me that hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before the whites arrived in Africa, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed people from the stars, as they said, that they used to interact with, they called them Mzungu. And when the whites first arrived to some of these tribes hundreds of years later, they called them the Mzungu because they thought these geezers were back, because they looked so similar.